the history of Silicon Valley, there is no single moment that defines startup failure more clearly than the day the founders of YouTube sat in a coffee shop and admitted they had built the wrong company. Chapter 1: The Accident. In 2005, three former PayPal employees, Chad Hurley, Steve Chen, and Jawed Karim, launched a video sharing site. The original concept was simple: a video dating site inspired by the popular Hot or Not photo rating platform. Users would upload short clips of themselves, describe what they were looking for, and connect with potential partners. Nobody used it. After weeks of almost zero activity, the founders made a desperate decision. They removed the dating restriction. They told users they could upload any video about anything for any reason. Within months, they had more traffic than they could handle. Less than a year after that pivot, Google acquired YouTube for $1.65 billion. But here's what most people miss about that story, and why it matters far more than you might think. YouTube's founders didn't pivot because they were brilliant. They didn't pivot because a consultant told them to. They pivoted because reality was giving them information they were too smart not to listen to. That distinction is everything. Chapter 2: The Pattern No One Teaches. When business schools teach entrepreneurship, they present the pivot as a calculated strategic maneuver, a deliberate repositioning, an intellectual decision made in a boardroom. The reality is almost always the opposite. Twitter started as Audio, a podcast discovery platform. When Apple launched iTunes podcast support in 2005, Audio was suddenly irrelevant overnight. Co-founder Jack Dorsey proposed a completely different idea: a short message status update service. The rest of the company thought it was a distraction. Dorsey convinced them to spend 2 weeks building it. That 2-week experiment became one of the most influential communication platforms in human history. Slack started as Glitch, a massively multiplayer online game that raised $17 million in venture capital and spent 4 years being built. The game failed entirely. But during development, the team had created an internal messaging tool to help them coordinate. When Glitch shut down, the team pivoted to that messaging tool. Slack is now worth more than $26 billion. Instagram started as Bourbon, a complex, location-based check-in app with gaming elements, alcohol features, and photo sharing. Users ignored 90% of the features. The one thing they used obsessively was the photo sharing component. Co-founders Kevin Systrom and Mike Krieger stripped everything else away and relaunched as Instagram. Within 18 months, they sold it to Facebook for $1 billion. The pattern is unmistakable. None of these companies found their purpose by executing a business plan. They found it by paying obsessive attention to what users were actually doing, rather than what the founders assumed users would do. Chapter 3: Why smart people build the wrong things. Before we go further, we need to address the question every founder asks but few answer honestly. Why do intelligent, motivated, well-resourced teams keep building things nobody wants? The answer is one of the oldest cognitive traps in human psychology, what researchers call confirmation bias. When you spend months developing an idea, writing a business plan, raising money, and recruiting a team, you don't just have a product, you have an identity. The idea becomes inseparable from who you are. Feedback that contradicts the vision doesn't feel like data. It feels like a personal attack. This is why so many founders explain away early warning signs. The users who left weren't the right users. The metrics that dropped were anomalies. The product just needs more time. Eric Ries, the author of The Lean Startup, spent years studying this pattern before he gave it a name. He called it building in the dark, the tendency to optimize a product without validating whether the core assumption is actually true. The cure Ries prescribed was radical honesty. Build the smallest possible version of your idea, put it in front of real users immediately, and measure what they actually do rather than what they say they'll do. Then build the next version based on what you learned, not what you believed. This sounds obvious. Almost no one actually does it. Chapter 4: The Anatomy of a Great Pivot. Here's the uncomfortable truth that most startup content refuses to say out loud. Not all pivots are created equal. Many are acts of clarity, but some are acts of panic. The difference is what drives the decision. Panic pivots happen when a founder's runway is burning down, the investors are getting nervous, and the team is losing faith. At that point, almost any change feels like hope. These pivots often fail, not because the new direction is wrong, but because the team is operating from fear rather than insight. Fear makes people move fast and think shallow. Insight requires the opposite. Clarity pivots happen when a founder notices a signal, often subtle, sometimes embarrassing, that points towards something genuinely better. The signal is almost always already in the data, in the customer conversations, in the thing that users keep gravitating toward, despite the founders trying to push them elsewhere. Stuart Butterfield, the founder of Slack, described this perfectly in an interview years after the pivot. He said that building Glitch had been one of the most interesting creative projects of his life, and also an obvious commercial failure. But the thing that saved the company wasn't changing the strategy. It was admitting what was already true. The tool they had accidentally built to run their own company was better than the game they had intentionally built for the world. The pivot didn't require a new idea. It required honesty about which of their existing ideas was actually working. Chapter 5. The framework every founder needs. So how do you know when to pivot and when to persevere? This is the question that separates experienced founders from beginners, and the answer is more nuanced than most advice columns will tell you. There are 3 signals that, when they appear together, indicate it is time to consider a real change in direction. The first signal is declining organic engagement. Not just slow growth, actual withdrawal. When users try your product once and don't return, and you have genuinely tried to understand why, and the feedback consistently points to the core premise rather than execution problems, something structural is wrong. The second signal is a bright spot you didn't plan for. In almost every great pivot story, there is a feature or use case that was an accident. Something users found on their own, used more than expected, and talked about enthusiastically without being prompted. When your analytics show a bright spot you didn't create intentionally, you have a signal. The third signal is the energy test. When the founders and the team talk about the original vision, does the room get quiet? When they talk about the new direction, do people lean forward? Energy is information. It is the aggregated intuition of smart people who have been close to the problem for a long time. When all 3 of these signals align, declining engagement in the original direction, a bright spot pointing somewhere new, and team energy following the new signal, that is your moment. Not every pivot leads to a billion-dollar outcome. Most don't. But every founder who has built something genuinely important has had to face this moment. The moment when the plan meets reality, and reality wins. The founders who handle that moment well are not the ones who never fail. They are the ones who fail forward, who extract the maximum amount of learning from what went wrong and use it to aim more precisely at what might go right. YouTube was not a dating site. Twitter was not a podcasting platform. Slack was not a video game. Instagram was not a check-in app. They became what they are because their founders were humble enough to listen to what reality was telling them, and brave enough to act on it before it was too late. If you want more stories like this, deep, honest breakdowns of how the most successful companies in the world were actually built, this channel is for you. Subscribe to Founder Fuel. Every week, we go beneath the surface of the startup world to find the insights that actually move the needle. The next breakdown is already waiting. See you there.